Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Judy, and I would like to give you my presentation on ab initio flight training survey analysis for Education 7003 Foundations of Research. Ab initio means from the beginning, if you're wondering, so we're looking at flight training from the beginning starting in flight simulators. The purpose was to gather data on the level of flight simulation training that's currently being given to mostly licensed pilots. I wrote up 20 questions. Though the first question just certified if they were 18 years of age or older. It was conducted using SOGO survey, and an email invitation was sent out to a target population. Non-random purpose of sampling was used, trying to target approximately 30 respondents. I got a response of 20, and this resulted in a 67% response rate. So pretty decent response rate for this type of survey. Demographics that I looked at were private pilot, an instrument pilot, a commercial pilot, and airline pilots. Most of my demographics were private pilots, followed by instrument pilots, and then airline pilots and commercial pilots. So not a lot of respondents from the airline pilots and commercial pilot population. I'll get to more of this a little bit later. 19 questions were reduced visually and analytically using a SOGO survey and then some statistical analysis. Critical areas that I evaluated were the importance of flight simulation, experience with it, fidelity, knowledge, difficulty of flight simulation, comparing that to the difficulty of training in an actual real aircraft, the level of support for this type of training, looked at simulation and automation, and then also got a cursory question of what their overall level of satisfaction was in the pilot training that they've had thus far. Use multiple Likert scales. These are the assigned values. Some examples: strongly agree to strongly disagree, essential to not important, very difficult to very easy, very realistic to poor, often to never, and strongly favored to strongly opposed, based on what type of question that I was actually asking the respondents. So let's look at some respondents. Which of the following best describes the type of flight training you received? Most of them were from private flight schools, which is really, meaning of private flight school is something like Tel Wills over at Lakeland. Is not really an official or collegiate type of flight school. We just talked about this, a type of pilot certificate. We had a lot more private pilots than any other demographic data. Most of the population that we looked at were in the range of 0 to 100 hours of training that they've done in a flight simulator. Very few, around 14.29%, were greater than 400. So for those that aren't very familiar with hours, 0 to 100 hours isn't a whole lot of hours, so we got pretty low time respondents here. Same way with this, how many total flight hours do you have as pilot in command? So this is actually flying the aircraft in the left seat, or as some might say, the captain of an airplane. Most of them were in the 40 to 100 hour range. Very few were over in the greater than 400 and even less than in the 200 to 300 range. And I had 0 respondents in the 300 to 400 range. So again, it shows low flight time pilots, which makes sense because most of them were private pilots that answered the questions. Almost all of my ratings were pretty high here, or mostly 4s, but please indicate to you personally the importance of flight simulator training. Essential and very important were the most common responses. Experience with flight simulation, a huge response in realistic. I had 0 and not realistic or poor. I thought that was pretty good. I was surprised at this answer. How has flight training or flight simulator training in a flight simulator affected a piloting skills? It's a major effect or moderate effect. Again, 0% in the minor or no effect. So tells us that flight simulation is affecting piloting skills. Flight simulation provides negative training, which this would be training that's wrong type of training that when you get into the real aircraft, you have to relearn a specific procedure. We had 71% say sometimes, 23% rarely, and very few said never. So this shows that there's some work to be done. Flight simulation training needs higher fidelity to closely resemble real aircraft operations. Very similar to the question we just asked before, but approximately 62% agree with that statement. This is looking at if we should expand flight simulation training across other domains within the aviation area, specifically pulling in air traffic control and flight attendants and maintenance and ground crews. This was a little bit across the board, and more about this a little bit later. Flight instructors have sufficient knowledge to actually train with flight simulators. Again, mostly agree. We had 15% disagree with this one. So that's a little bit interesting as well. Check airmen have sufficient knowledge. So the difference between the flight instructor and check airman, the check airman is the one that actually signs the pilot certificate. A flight instructor is giving you your training as you go about doing your flight training. So this is normally, a check airman is normally given that privilege by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to issue the actual license to pilots. So 60% agree that they don't have sufficient knowledge to certify pilots in flight simulators. Again, this is an interesting response as well. Indicate the level of difficulty in training on a flight simulator. 62% said difficult. We had very few say very easy. So this is a pretty good response here as well. Please indicate the training level of difficulty in a real aircraft. Very similar response to the first question about the difficulty in a flight simulator. And your level of support for starting pilot training in a flight simulator instead of a real aircraft. This is the one I was really interested in getting, and I was surprised by this as well. Strongly favors 62%, somewhat favor 33%, and just a little bit of somewhat oppose, and none strongly oppose. So again, we're looking at ab initio flight training and looking at flight simulation training from the beginning. So it's really interesting to see if we could maybe start training pilots totally in flight simulators to begin with before they ever fly on an actual real airplane. And this is something that a lot of airlines and manufacturers are starting to look at, because the cost of training pilots in a real airplane is certainly not cheap, and it's much cheaper to operate a flight simulator. You can also do a lot of other different things in a flight simulator that you can't do in a real airplane. I can't take you up in a real airplane and fail both engines or start an engine fire. That would be bad. That would be a real emergency. We don't do that. So we do that in the simulators. If anybody remembers Captain Sully Sahlberg, who landed the United airplane on the Hudson River there in New York, he is quoted as saying, flight simulation saved that air crew and the passengers on board. That's how he knew how to land that airplane on the water with dual engine out. Flight simulation training will help pilots with learning advanced flight deck displays. 75% strongly agree and 25% agree. Again, pretty significant response. Very similar with automation systems, a little bit even higher. Strongly agree, 80%, and 20% agree. This is a question with regards to cost. Flight simulation costs less. And finally, this is the level of satisfaction with pilot training, and most were either very satisfied or moderately satisfied, and none that were slightly satisfied or not at all satisfied. So pretty good response there as well. So let's look. If you can see here, I graphed the responses across the questions, starting with question 4, because that's really where the statistical analysis made the most sense based on the types of questions I was asking. So pretty even across. If 4 is your strongly agree, or your strong end of the Likert scale, you can see here in the mean per question, pretty high up. Basically a 3 or above. So mostly somewhat, agree or strongly agree with the types of questions that I was asking. To the right, you can see the median, which kind of shows that, mostly 3s and 4s, with a couple 1, 2, and 1, 1. So again, a pretty strong response. This shows the mode per question and then the standard deviation per question. Pretty consistent across, especially when you get through questions 8 through 20. Not a lot of fluctuation in the standard deviation. So a couple research conclusions that I really looked at was questions 6, 8, 9, 10, and 16. The importance of flight simulation training was rated at 57% essential and 33% very important. That's a total of 90%. The effect on improving piloting skills, 62% major effect, 38% moderate effect, a total of 100%. So 0 answered minor or no effect. Flight simulation provides negative training. We did get this. So this shows that there are some signs of needed improvement. Same way with question 10, flight simulation needs to have higher fidelity to closer resemble real aircraft operations. Again, shows some signs of needed improvement. So questions 6, 8, 9, 10, and 16 were all significant as well. A few recommendations that I would like to do if we redid this type of survey is increase the response rate. To do that, I would do more of a target population of airline pilots. Many of the respondents were private pilots, which did not allow for really an adequate representation across all those various piloting skill sets that I was looking at, specifically the airline pilot or commercial pilot representation. I would look at an accessible population, probably pick one airline, something like a JetBlue or Southwest, and target that. Use sampling method, use the random sampling method, which is, as we've learned in this course, is the gold standard for research. I would also reduce the type of Likert scales. I think I had too many types of Likert scales, so I need to do a better job of rewriting the questions so I could take that down. It would be easier to do some of the analysis. And then do more refining on the questions and base that more on a thorough review of literature to try to drive the exact questions I really want to look at. The future is very bright in this area. As I said at the beginning, in some cases, a lot of organizations are starting to look at 100% simulation flight training. That's all I have. Thank you for your time, and I enjoyed the class and hope to see you again.